Greetings and Happy New Year. As the President Dean of Turner Theological Seminary, I want to take this moment to invite our alumni and entire AME Church Connection to join us for a virtual celebration of the 127th Founders Observance of the Turner Theological Seminary, scheduled for February the 1st and 2nd. You will be blessed with impactful preaching and teaching by Bishop Samuel Lawrence Green Sr., presiding prelate, 7th Episcopal District.
This seminary is the intersection where race, religion, economics, politics, theology, history, language, culture, and the critical interrogation of what we think about God are brought together in a way that is both intersectional and utilitarian.
And Reginald T. Jackson, presiding prelate of the 6th Episcopal District.
Evangelical right also call themselves evangelical Christians. And my argument with them is I have no problem with you calling yourselves evangelical, but I have a problem with you calling yourselves Christian. Because my brother, my sisters, when you look at them, too many of them, they tell the king what the king wants to hear, not what the king needs to hear.
The man, and Dr. Dennis C. Dickerson, retired general officer, who will give our Henry McNeil Turner Heritage Lecture. I promise that you will be blessed and inspired by the preaching and teaching. So register today, and thank you in advance for your support of Turner Theological Seminary 127th Founders Observance.
Good evening, and welcome to the Turner Theological Seminary Alumni Forum. Sitting at their feet, women, leading women in African Methodism. And to Bishop Jackson, the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Turner Theological Seminary, to our President Dean Green, to Reverend Matthew Williams, the president of ITC, and to the officers and members of the Turner Alumni, to our honorees this year and future alumni, to our faculty, staff, and friends. It is my esteemed pleasure to begin our celebration of the 127th Founders Day celebration of Turner Theological Seminary of the Interdenominational Theological Center. I'm the Reverend Dr. J.S. Haithco Sr., president of the Turner Alumni Association. And tonight, we are blessed to have with us 3 leading women in African Methodism as we sit at their feet. We are pleased to have with us Dr. Carolyn McCrary, Dr. Jackie Grant-Collier, and Dr. Teresa Fry-Brown. And our moderator this evening will be the Reverend Tashara Void. But before we proceed to our panel, I want to ask the Reverend Curry Butler if he would lead us in prayer this evening, and the Reverend Oria Parker to read our scripture for tonight. Reverend Butler, you're muted. We can't hear you, sir.
Bless your bones. Let us pray. Again. The Father God, Lord, we come thanking you once again for all you've done for us, for all the ways you made for us, all the times you provided for us, God, for walking with us and being by our side. We come thanking you, Lord, for the legacy of our founder and for Reverend Henry McNeil Turner, God, the school's namesake. But we also come, God, thanking you for Dr. Collier, Grant-Collier, and Dr. McCrary, and Dr. Teresa Fry-Brown on tonight, God. We thank you, Lord, for the legacy that they've paved for us, Lord. And tonight we come to sit at their feet, God. So open up our eyes that we might see and our ears that we might hear that what you have for us today. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. This evening, our scripture comes from Isaiah, the 52nd chapter, verse 7, the New Revised Standard Version. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, who brings good news, who announces salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Amen.
And now at this time, let us welcome the Reverend Tashara Void, our moderator for tonight.
In celebration of the 127th Founders Observance, the Turner Theological Seminary alumni presents Sitting at Their Feet, Leading Women in African Methodism. Tonight you will be blessed by the phenomenal ministries of the Reverend Dr. Teresa L. Fry Brown, who is the Bandy Professor of Preaching at the Canada School of Theology. You will also be blessed by the phenomenal ministry of the Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Grant, who is the Fuller E. Calloway Distinguished Professor of Systematic Theology at the Interdenominational Theological Center. And in great concert, you will be blessed by the ministry of the Reverend Dr. Carolyn A.L. McCrary, who is the Jarena Lee Professor of Pastoral Theology, Care and Counseling at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Not only are these phenomenal women of African Methodism, but they also contribute and are founders of the great change and impact that comes through womanist theology. Tonight, you are going to have an experience that is going to enhance your life. I want you to love, like, share the broadcast, start a watch party, invite somebody to come in with you and absorb the great wisdom that you're going to receive tonight. For more information on the continuation of this great conference, this 127th Founders Observance, visit the website turnerseminary.org. That's right, turnerseminary.org. I want you to consider giving tonight. When you go to the website, click on the Give button to support the work and give in the name and nature of these phenomenal women who are going to share with you more excellently about what God has made them in their generation. Enjoy the broadcast and get ready to sit at their feet.
Good evening and welcome to the 127th Founders Day celebration. We welcome all of the alumni, friends, and students of Turner Theological Seminary who are here with us to just sit at the feet of these three wonderful women who have paved the way for so many who have come after them. I have the pleasure of moderating this conversation, and I think it not robbery that we take this time to really sit and spend with them and to learn how they overcame so many struggles as they navigated the ministry in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, as well as finding and identifying their own unique voices. So we will start with our Lifetime Achievement Awardee, Reverend Dr. Teresa Fry Brown. And I'm going to ask this question to all three of you. Can you tell us about your ministry struggles, what challenges you faced being a woman in ministry, especially in a predominantly male-led denomination?
How much time do we have?
Right.
I think that this is my 39th year in ordained ministry. And I think initially because where I was located, there were no other women at the church where I was. And so I became this enigma. And there was only one other woman in the entire conference that was going for local orders. And so I think initially it was just the newness in that particular area in Colorado about what it meant to have a woman do what was traditionally a men's job. It was about people, men and women in the church, not talking to me, calling me names, saying that I wasn't really called, saying that I must have answered my husband's call, being required to go to school, which I love education anyway, but was told that the men in my class didn't have to go to school because they had families to support. So it was things like being told to stand on the floor and preach when I visited other churches. And the last time I did that was in 2000 when I had to stand at the foot of my mother's casket to do her eulogy because I wasn't allowed in the pulpit still. So some of these things are perennial. Some of the things are perennial. I think the idea, my grandmother used to say, you have to be twice as good to be think half as good. It's still that kind of disproportionate. I have to prove that I'm someone by degrees, where people would rather call me Dr. Fry Brown than Reverend Fry Brown, even today. And so that's been some of the struggles, I guess, along with persons who thought that the best way for me to advance would be to give up my integrity and my body. And once I refuse to do that, you have consequences for doing things your way. So I'll leave that there. So I think that's just little things, but there's been so many good things, but those were some of the things that in some cases still happen. In some cases still happen.
And so how did you overcome some of those challenges that you faced? Like, what steps did you take? What did you do? Who did you talk to?
Some things come by prayer and fasting, but I think also I was very fortunate in that my father in ministry, Jesse Boyd, brought Carolyn Tyler Guidry in to talk with me. When I was able to later travel to church, I talked to Dr. Grant. There were some men in my life that were very supportive. There were some older women who were in two camps, those that were frustrated because they were not allowed in ministry, and those that did everything to make sure that I could do what I needed to do in ministry. And so it was a community. I believe in communal kind of things. So it was a community that helped me through. Other than that, it was a lot of prayer and cursing. I just want you to cussing. A lot of prayer and cussing. And and that my faith that God called me regardless of what other people said was what brought me to the part that I am right now.
So prayer, fasting, cussing, and then
Yes.
having a community of advocates around you to stand in your stead.
Exactly.
All right. And so our two Turner alums, Reverend Dr. Carolyn McCrary and Reverend Dr. Grant-Collier, the same question to you. We will start with you, Dr. McCrary, and then go to you, Dr. Grant.
Hello there. Good to see my sisters and my brothers. I'm hoping you all can hear me okay. I'm still hearing a lot of reverberation, so I'll kind of act like it's not there. When I first contemplated this, I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. Talking privately sometimes it's easier than speaking publicly. There is the kind of hesitancy and anxiety, too much self-exposure, but just enough to maybe be helpful. I reflect on the concept of sankofa, which talks about not being ashamed to go back and fetch those things which are important and bringing them with you. As that proverbial sankofa bird flies into the future with her head turned backwards, and some say plucking an egg from her tail feathers. So I don't want to a whole lot of time because we don't have a lot of time, and I really want to hear more than I want to talk. And I really want to hear other questions as well. Dr. T, you reminded me, like, how many years I've been in the ministry now? So my calling was 47 years ago. And I can clearly remember that at that time, it wasn't so much male domination at first. And to make it a very quick statement, it was not internalized male domination. Because, well, number one, I was like, oh God, I know this is not some kind of calling. I've been working in the church all my life. This couldn't thrive. Pulpit? No. Me? Oh, and then it came me, a woman? Oh my God. Oh, Me, a woman getting a divorce, I'm broken and not knowing what? I guess I'm just kind of losing it all together, obviously. The other thing is I did not know any other women in the ministry. In Macon, Georgia, in the Mississippi River, in Fort Hill, East Macon, or Camp Hope, where I eventually moved when I was 7. Didn't know any women in the ministry. I won't go into too much detail about that, but in this reflection, kind of this Sankofa reflection, I said to myself, wait a minute. There were women in the ministry. They just were not ordained women in the ministry. So when I think back about Miss Sherney, happened to be seeing me live next door to the Sunday school. When I think about the Sunday school teachers at Great Chapel AME Church, and then at Camp Hope AME Church, I think about Lord, sister, I say, and she was about somebody, my sister and brother Annie and Nathaniel L. Cooper. These were women who were in the ministry and who did a lot of ministerial things, but they weren't in those leadership positions, quote unquote. I want to highlight the fact we talk about intersectionality. I remember Louise Reed, and she was always critiquing issues about women and using Church Women United, and I was like, what is that? And she was critiquing racism and white supremacy. Even then, Sister Louise Reed was, look at the Bible, you all. Look at Solomon. She says, I'm black and beautiful. Okay, so I'm a little girl. So as I reflect, there were women, but I do want to say that one particular struggle, once I said, okay, God, I'll see, I may as well go all the way and processing through my ordination, I was up under, let's say, 3 bishops at one time. Being quickly stated, one bishop, let's just say, was hesitant. Another one was helpful because he asked me, Carolyn, how can we help you? Wow. And that was in my doctoral process. And then there was another prelate who, in the ordination, not mine, told this, well, you know you're gonna have to, because there are men who need this. And like Dr. T was saying, families. And it was as if, this is a reality now, and I just want to remind you of that. And so this is how it is, and this is how it's going to be. And the way that it was said, I couldn't believe it to the whole floor of the church. So thank God there have been people who have really helped and ushered, bishops, presiding elders, pastors. My pastor could not have been more supportive. So there've been a number of things. I think I want to stop kind of, because if I go on, I'll talk too much here at the beginning, and I want to honor all of our time. So other things will come up.
I appreciate that. And the one I heard is the same thing that I heard with Dr. Fry Brown, is that advocacy, that you face some resistance as well, but there were those who stood up and said that they were going to help you along the way, to help you navigate that journey. And so we're going to come back to that, because I believe that's an important part of anyone's journey, is having someone be able to walk with them and to journey with them, and even to open those doors for them. Dr. Grant, tell us about your ministry challenges and struggles that you face.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here on the panel with my dear sisters, Reverend Dr. Teresa and Reverend Dr. Carolyn. Well, the best thing I can say is that I have been in the church all of my life, the daughter of an AME pastor of 39 years. He pastored for 39 years. I was in the church all of my life, and had a close relationship with him in that I was also the musician at 3 of his charges. And so I was there with him even when my sisters and brothers on those Sundays had an opportunity to stay home and do what young folks want to do. I could not do that because I was in the ministry of music at that time. So I've been in the church and very involved and active in the church since really elementary school, starting engaged in leadership work. Even back then, president of the Junior Missionary Society, president of the Junior Usher Board, and all those kinds of experiences. Sunday school teacher, and then 7th grade organist in my home church, and then in the 8th grade started going with my daddy, being organist with his choir in South Carolina. And when I went to college, I then at college, Greensboro, North Carolina, was still involved in ministry in the educational context. I founded an organization called SC, Students for Christian Social Concerns. And we were able to get Bennett Bells, what we are called, to be involved in the ministry, not in the church, but in the community. And we had a variety of ministries there. It was at that point that I felt the call to ministry in as a profession. And so it was then that I came to Turner to be trained to live out my professional calling. It was in that context, for the first time, I experienced negative attitudes regarding women in ministry. I had not grown up with that. At least I was not aware of it. I'm sure it existed in my community, but I was not aware of it then. I do remember one of the major evangelists in the community was a woman evangelist, not in the AME context, but in one of the Pentecostal traditions. And she was very well respected by all, but there were problems. In other contexts, I remember finding out later in my life that one of the women seeking ordination in the AME tradition was given a hard time. She was experiencing a lot of struggles in that movement, in her movement, and I became aware that he was very helpful in supporting her and moving through her process. She later moved to New York and became presiding elder in that context. But my ministry, while in seminary, I experienced a lot of challenges, and so it was my first experiencing of that real negative attitudes of my brothers in the preparing for the ministry. I remember one student, we were in the library and studying, and he said to me, "Jackie, you know, the problem, you know, I like you, but the problem I have with you is that you're in the ministry and you might take my job." And my response to him was, "Well, I don't want your job. You know, I don't feel that call to the pastoring ministry. I feel the call to the Ministry of Education. But I do feel that those women who are called to the ministry, who are called to the pastoring ministry, you know, they ought to be able to get those pastoring positions and not be discriminated against because of their gender." Now, I don't want your pastoring position, but there are women who are called to that ministry, and if they are more qualified, then they should have that pastoring position. My experience is the interesting thing is, even as I left Turner Seminary and on my way headed to Union Theological Seminary to study with Reverend Dr. James Cone, I remember being in the registrar's office, turning in our caps and gown after graduation. And one of my brothers asked me, "What are you doing when you leave here?" I said, "I'm going to Union Seminary to do a PhD in systematic theology." The first thing he said to me, "Well, you're not going to get married then, huh? You're not going to have a family." I said, "Well, I hope so. Why do you say that?" It's interesting. Then I began to experience, another level of resistance of women's ministry, women's capacity to practice their ministry and be whole persons. Women are not allowed to be whole persons as men are allowed to be whole persons, which brings to mind one experience that women have in as you said, used to have back in the day. At least I hope it's used to have, and I hope it's only back in the day. But interestingly, one of the questions that women would get when they come to the conference floor in the Board of Examiners report, one of the questions women would get was, "What does your husband think about your being in the ministry?" And every time I heard that question, it was just so irritating. Not that it's a bad question. It's not a bad question. The problematic with the question is that you limit the question to women. The question would be fine if you ask everybody, because you ought to be asking the brothers. You ought to be asking the men, "What does your wife think about your being in the ministry?" But the patriarchal assumption is that they don't know matter. Excuse me, excuse the English, but it does not matter what your wife thinks. If you are called to the ministry, if you are doing what God calls you to do, then it does not matter what she says. It does not matter what she thinks. That's the sexist nature of the situation. Because it should be a question that you ask everybody, and not just a question that you ask women, because you live in a patriarchal society, you live in a patriarchal church, which says that it does not matter what women think. It does not matter what's appropriate for women. It does not matter. And so what you are concerned about is only, what men think, because men define the world and men define the church. Well, my struggles, I'm it's getting kind of long. I'm gonna cut it. But one of the things I've done in my ministry to try to challenge all of what I was experiencing since seminary, not prior to seminary, but since seminary, while in seminary and since seminary, is to develop advocacy ministries that indeed challenge the patriarchal systems and the gender oppression that women experience in the church. And so it was in 1976 when the annual general conference was here in Atlanta, and I called the women in ministry together to do some organizing. Prior to that, I been on a position paper committee where we produced position papers on issues of the day, capital punishment, reproductive rights, a variety of issues. And I did a position paper on women, and it was entitled "The Status of Women in the AME Church." And I raised issues about the situation of women in the church and when women decide receive the call to preach, and the problematics that they experience in their desire to fulfill their call. And that position paper was presented to, the recommendations were presented to the General Conference in '76. But at the General Conference, I also brought together the women in ministry, and that group, that was the first time that we met as a group. And over the years, it developed into what is now AME Women in Ministry. And the advocacy work of that group led to also the development of the Commission on Women in Ministry. And I would also say that the advocacy work of that group, also with the support of other organizations like the lay organization and the missionary society, led to the election of women as general officers and women as bishops, beginning with Vashti McKenzie in the year 2000. It also led to the increase of women as pastors and as presiding elders as well. But I would also say, even as we recognize the progress that we have made in the church, the fact of the matter is we're still not there yet. Two mantras that I operate by. One is more things change, the more things remain the same. And so there are still issues that we need to be dealing with that has a long history. And the other mantra I operate by is we come a long way, but we've got a longer way to go, because we still have to reach that point of liberation of Black women and justice for Black women, even in the ministry.
So there's a common theme that I hear throughout all of you ladies' stories. It is one of resistance, but then there is also the sexism and the gender oppression that happens, but then there's the advocacy. There is the advocacy of others that stand in with you, and then there's also carving your own spaces. But then the one thing that I heard that happened with all three of you is this sense of fragmentation, where you are not allowed to show up as your whole self, where you have to either choose to be a woman or choose to be a preacher, or choose to be Black and choose to be a woman, or choose to be a Black woman but not a Black preacher. And so there are all these fragmentations that happen with women in ministry. And I've had the pleasure of sitting under the feet of all three of you women. So I have seen how you all show up as your whole selves, and you show up with your authenticity of being you and all that God has created you to be. How did you get to that space of being authentically Dr. Teresa Fry Brown, and being authentically the Reverend Dr. Carolyn McCrary, and being authentically Dr. Jacqueline Grant? And I ask that because, well, Dr. McCrary, you've paved the way for pastoral care, and Dr. Fry Brown, you've paved the way for preaching and teaching, and also Dr. Grant, you've paved the way in theology, in systematic theology. How did you get to that point of identifying and claiming your voice and being who the Creator has made you to be? No, don't everyone speak at once.
Dr. T says, how much time you have? How?
I'm not sure that. I think it's still in process for me.
Right.
I think that I would be dead if I wasn't still developing something. I think that years became critically important for me to try to understand who I am, what my gifts are, and understand that not everybody's going to like me, nor do I seek that. And that in order for me to chart my own path, I had to look at who was before me, so I didn't stumble on the same path or run to the same glass that they did. I also had to understand I'd be cut every now and then, and there would be some isolation every now and then. There would be some names that still swirl around in my head sometime when I go to a pulpit from years and years ago, that I have to pray that God muffles my ears so I don't hear it. That there were some people that I thought were going to be my supporters that became my enemies. Not because I asked them to, but they decided that I was taking, as Dr. Grant said, they thought I was there to take their place. So I didn't trust a God that only had one space. I had to learn to trust a God that was big enough for everybody to be included somewhere. And so the voice that I have to develop in the church is a little different than the voice I had to develop in the academy. It's a little different than the voice I had to develop in the world. It's a little different than the voice I had to develop in my home. Because my first husband divorced me because I went into ministry. Then there were people that said that I was going to wind up, my child was going to wind up on the street, she was going to wind up pregnant, we were going to wind up poor. And so I had to listen to all the, Dr. Carol, all the ancestors that came through with me and preached out in fields and in corners and on the roadside. And I thought I would be a wimp to try it myself. And so if someone in a pulpit, I could preach anyway, I believe ground is ground. If someone said I wanted to work to an office because I didn't do what they told me to do, I had to trust God to provide for me to be there regardless of the distractors. And then to also keep my voice when God helped me succeed at something, and the very people that try to keep me out then claim that they helped me along the way, and not turn around and, I'm using my word again, and cuss their behinds out, but to pray for them. I'm quiet, but I grew up in Missouri fighting, and I grew up with boys, so I know how to do that. And so it's that kind of thing. And so my voice is coming to a place where I don't come in with my head down, but I come in knowing that wherever I am, God made me to be there. And so some people have heard me say this before. I don't beg for a seat at the table. I understand when I enter a room, I can shift the atmosphere just by being who God made me. So I don't have to do it. I don't apologize for where I am. I don't apologize for where I work. I don't apologize for my dress. I don't apologize for what my voice sounds like. I don't apologize for what I love. I just show up because I trust God that much. I'm done.
Thank you very much. That was awesome. And especially the part where you said you don't beg for a seat at the table because you know just your presence will shift the atmosphere. That type of, dare I say, boldness and confidence in who God has created you to be, that definitely comes with wisdom and years of just being at God's feet and listening to the ancestors and how God has spoken into you. So thank you very much for sharing that. Dr. McCrary? You're muted, Dr. McCrary. There you go.
I'm okay. I think he unmuted me. Yes. The essence of this was what did we do to navigate and overcome even with all the challenges. I've gone through many as Dr. T was talking to Dr. Grant. I want to focus on one part where I first raised the question. This is actually, I went to my coming to seminary because I came to, interestingly enough, seminary. It was a convergence of life's challenges, and many people have heard that when I did come to seminary, I was basically suicidal because two of my titles had fallen that I thought were wonderful. And I'll just say, one was marriage, which I thought was good and holy, and you need to stay in. And another one was education, because I thought I was going for a certain trajectory. In my education, I was studying French African literature. And one of the poems that I studied in that genre of negritude, of being Black in colonized countries in Africa, by Bernard Dadier, wrote a poem, Je vous remercie de m'avoir créé moi. I was like, how in the world? Now we're talking about the 70s, you all. How in the world is somebody writing about, I thank you again, my God, for having created me Black. So now I'm wrestling with my blackness. I'm wrestling with being a woman, wrestling with being divorced. I'm wrestling with the shame of my family. Oh, I had the biggest, nicest wedding. I'm so glad I did. I have wonderful pictures of relatives that have passed. But it was really traumatic. My point is, by the time my mama asked me the question, as I'm spiraling into what I know now was depression, she said, "Now, what were you studying when you were up there at Brown in Rhode Island?" I said, "I was studying French African literature." She said, "Well, why don't you go back and study that some more?" So, well, Mama, when I was studying, they told me that what I was asking questions about in this literature had to do with African theology. I said, "Oh my God, all the things I studied in college in France and Africa, I visited there, but I didn't think about theology. I don't even know really what theology is." So my mama said, "Well, Carolyn, don't they have one of those theology schools up there in Atlanta?" She read all the A&E papers and notices and everything. She said, "Well, I know it's up there. You go up there and fight. Billy's going up there Monday. You go with him." Consequently, I ended up at the Interdenominational Theological Center, Turner Seminary. And it was actually the place Dr. Ndugu Tofari knew what I was talking about in terms of French African literature and literature. Dr. Thomas Lord have mercy. Carolyn, you are somebody. And yes, you have some struggles. And let me listen to you. And others, Dr. Isaac R. Clarke. The real point that I want to make is that I was studying for my life. I was looking for a reason to continue. So in studying, I ended up graduating at the top of my class. Not because that was aspirations, but I wanted to read everything that was given to me. I wanted to study everything. I even asked one of our professors in church history. I said, "Well, where's the book with all the African history in it?" And he told me, he said, "Well, you don't have it on the syllabus, but you can go and look up in Jacqueline." I said, "Oh, Africa, the mother of major Western theologies and philosophies." I had already encountered Cheikh Anta Diop. So Africa being the mother of the cradle of civilization, because I needed that to come out the struggle to connect all these parts of me. So like Dr. T is saying, there are different dimensions and different parts. It was only at ITC that I was able to look at that part of me. By the time I was articulating, and Dr. Grant had just left when I came, though we had been at college together, I knew to think about the issues that women face. I was able to move from myself and my own, which I've been working on all my life since then, all my internalizations. But let me look at the plight of women and others and children for that matter, and men for that matter. So just kind of jump forward and moving back and jumping forward. I was a womanist before I knew it. And the term has come to help me to have words to say, my God, white supremacy. Oh, look how it manifested way back then when they parcel up, even before that, when they colonized, when they brought it over here, the whole spiel. And then now, how it, let me look at how males supremacy impacts me and other people. And let me look at how economic disparities impact me. It helped me, my studies at ITC. And I'm saying that deliberately. This is an alumni occasion. I will say in this part right here, you all, I was a kind of challenging one in the positive. I was dumbfounded when I saw people who didn't want to read. I was like, really? Even then, you paying money? Okay. I think to help some people at that time, I became a tutor and tutored in homiletic and at that time Old Testament, and had that kind of community of students together. So I became a TA of sorts, as we call it, and I learned even more. Really want to learn something, teach it. So different parts. I mean, that's a little bit and piece. That's as much as I can say and kind of put a lip right. But studying the world, my relationship to God, oh God, that takes way too much time. And my relationship to myself and others gave me meaning and wanting to live.
So in your quest and your hope for living, to finding purpose, to being able to find that healing, you use your studies, and that is actually your voice actually spoke before you actually reclaimed your voice. When you said that you were a womanist before you knew it, that means it was already in you when it came out of you, but it was your studies that helped you to give word to that. That is awesome, and it definitely helpful to someone who may be struggling, even because we know even our not our founder, but even the Reverend Jarena Lee had that same type of story where she was really wrestling and really struggling. And it was really that communion with God. It was really that digging deep. It was really that going beyond and being able to find and follow that voice that allowed her to show up. And so, Dr. McCrary, we thank you for that nugget that's helping someone who is also struggling, helping someone to let them know that on their journey to healing, if they just keep studying, they just keep looking at the world and everything around them, they will find God, find themselves, find life, and find meaning. So thank you. Dr. Grant, how did you come to find and to embrace your call?
Yeah, I think it that very positive experience that I had in my home with pastor, preacher, father, and the support that I had when I went to college. I was able to start that Christian organization, SCSC. I was able to start that because I worked in the office of the chaplain, and he was very supportive of me and very supportive of my work. I was about to tell you something funny about that, but I won't. So I had the support of people in my life when I was growing up. Even apart from going to church with Daddy every Sunday, it was going to the Episcopal meetings in Columbia at Allen University, and would be Daddy and a bunch of other preachers and me. I've always had the support of trying to seminary, and so it enabled me to develop in ways that perhaps others had not. When I got to seminary, that also, even though I was experiencing some resistance, some struggles, because of the attitudes of some brothers, some of the brethren. It still did not interfere with my sense of call. And so I was able to move through all of that. Also, Dr. Carolyn also graduating at the top of my class at ITC, and then moving to the PhD program where I had the opportunity to study even more of women, Black women in particular. That led me to the development of womanist theology, finding all of these women that of whom I was not aware when I was studying in seminary. I'd never studied any women while I was in seminary, so at the master's level. So it was when I went to the PhD level that I began to study these issues, and as I was able to research Black women's experiences as a source for doing theology, I was introduced to feminist theology, but I had not been introduced to the experiences of Black women, and so that's really what got me into the process of finding out who we are and providing and insisting that our experiences must be used as a source for doing theology. And what that means then is that we must do theology in more holistic ways, because yes, Black women suffer from gender contradiction, living with sexism, but that's not all. That's not all of our reality. There's also racism because of our Blackness, and when you what one author called live in this double jeopardy situation, you're Black and you're female, then that means that you're most often poor. And so that we have to deal with issues of race, gender, and class. One churchwoman says that we not just live in experiences of double jeopardy, but it's triple jeopardy. There's the Black, the female, and we in the church. And so we, researching all of this experiences and how Black women historically have challenged the various kinds of isms that exist in our lives, then provided me with the strength that I needed to do what I began doing in the mid-70s in the church in particular. Now, the problem with that is, well, it's not necessarily a problem, but the reality of that is that you don't always make friends. When you're raising issues and challenging structures that existed not just years, not just decades, but centuries. You're challenging institutions, you're challenging structures, and people have bought into those institutions and structures. And when you challenge them, the structures, you challenging the people because they're so grounded in them. And so, what that meant was that, it wasn't always, pretty, but the way I dealt with that is even as I remember those experiences we had in the church at general conferences and at bishops' councils, meetings. When we started Women in Ministry, we used to meet with the bishops at the bishops' councils, and then we would do some things at general conference. And one of the things we had, I remember, we used to have what we called late night dialogue with the bishops.
Mhm.
Now this is way back, in the 70s. Dr. Teresa, I had not really thought about it. It hadn't dawned on me. But in actuality, I've been in ministry for 47 years too, Dr. Carolyn, in terms of the ordained ministry. That is, but back in the 70s, women were timid. Women were afraid to ask these questions, to make demands, to challenge situations and institutions, etc. And so we started having these late night dialogues with the bishops, and it really used to be late night. It would start like midnight, and sometimes it start like 10, 11, and go even a little past midnight. But women weren't, they were kind of timid about raising questions. So I would moderate the sessions and I would raise the questions. And then I would, have them to write their question down and, send them to me, and I would raise the question. My rationale was, well, I really was not looking for any bishop to appoint me to a church. Rather they get mad with me or not, it really doesn't matter. I understand the concern of the women, who would say, if I raise this question, he might get mad with me, and I don't know what he'll do to me.
Ashe. Amen.
So not hearing gave you space to be able to use your voice.
Come again?
I said, so not desiring a pastorate gave you that space to be able to use your voice because you didn't have the fear of repercussion.
Yeah, that was what was my thought. But I would like to think that even if I did feel a call to the ministry, that perhaps I'd do the same anyway. But but I don't know. But it was just my sense of call. God calls you to the ministry, and that means that everybody's not going to like you. So it's not a ministry of trying to get folks to like you, or trying to get disciples, or some folks going to like you and some folks not going to like you. Some folks going to misinterpret what you're saying, and because I've never intended that any bishop would get mad with me. My intention is just raise questions about what you're doing, raise questions about what you developed here, raise questions about how you impacting women's lives. And just goes beyond just giving somebody a church. My position is I ought to be able to raise questions about what you're doing. So it was not done in any disrespect. I have great respect for all officers of the church. Just like I have great respect for governmental political offices. But when you develop the structures that are oppressive of certain people because of something they cannot even control. I can't control my gender. I can't control my race. Then that's problematic. And so, my position is you raise the question where questions need to be raised, and I think I've been good at being respectful of people, though they may not interpret the way I have challenged issues, principalities, and powers. They certainly were not intended to be disrespectful, but intended to try to get significant changes in the church and in the large society. Because indeed we are all God's children.
Amen. Ashe to that.
Yes, ma'am. I say to that, because as you said, as you challenge the system, you're not just challenging the system, you're challenging the people. And so that's going to cause some backlash. That's going to cause some people to be unhappy, but you got to raise the questions. You got to be able to ask them. So I do want to shift gears a little bit because we had a question that came in the comment section. And so one of our viewers would like to know, what is one thing about you that people would be surprised to know? What is one thing about you that people would be surprised to know? We know about Dr. Fry Brown, the teacher. We know about the academician. We know about the preacher. We know about Dr. McCrary, the pastoral care and the healing. We know about Dr. Grant and the systematic theology and the womanist theology. But what is one thing that people would be surprised to know?
I'm sorry, my goodness.
That I was.
Whoever would like to answer.
Do I have to go first again? Go ahead, my sister. Go right ahead. I'm still thinking.
No, I like this. No, but I was probably the best gym in Camp Hope because I could climb the tallest trees. My brother and I'm the first girl under 3 boys, so others who were boys, so over me, but he went. I learned everything: football, baseball, basketball, rock fights. I used to attend rock, and it's a wonder that you can ever get to live. But I also learned to climb trees, and there was this 50-foot pine tree in my yard, and I would go to the top of that tree and sit. And now that you all have pushed me to say this, because at the top of that tree, I could see the church, Camp Hope Emily Church, that was down the street and around the corner, and I could see the little red schoolhouse that beside it, which was the land granted to that Black community. It was really a village. I'm reflecting on so much of how it was a village. And the reason I say I was a gymnast, not only climbing, but I had a dismount out of that tree that what's my sister Biles' first name?
Simone.
Dismount with the 10 off that last limb and go ta-da! So, but it also speaks to economic disparities, because I think had there been the kind of economic support for our community and our schools. Gymnastics. We played basketball on a concrete floor because the white people refused to put the hardwood over the concrete when they built Maggie Taylor Elementary and High School in Gray, Georgia.
Dr. McCrary, we could have been looking at you in the Olympics.
I mean, really.
Dr. Grant, what is something about you that people would be surprising to know?
I really have not thought of anything. Dr. Teresa, maybe while you talk, I might can think of something. I'm thinking.
I think because I've written about my life that people probably already know that I ran track with Dr. Carolyn. And because I grew up in a ways, so I do all those things that were thought women couldn't do. But I remember when I was 18 getting ready to go to college, my brother and my dad had me pull transmissions because they said I was too independent, would I be by myself all the time. So I like to work on cars when that was what you could do. The only other thing I think, people know I directed choirs, but I'm always surprised that people think that I can't cook because I'm a woman in ministry. And so when they, it's like, oh, you can do those things. And I just think that's very funny. But other than that, I love Jeopardy. I can't think of anything. I love games and procedural dramas, and wanted to go to law school. So ministry was not my first thing. It was law. But I was told I couldn't know. First was a translator at the union. I took German and Spanish and stuff like that. Then it was law school. And I wound up God saying it's time to go to seminary. And I would have been at the ITC, except I was going through a divorce and had a 2-year-old and could not leave Denver. So I went to school in Denver. I just clear that up since everybody else is an alum. All right. Thank you very much. Okay.
Well, you did give me one idea, Dr. Teresa, and that is this whole thing about cooking. My Atlanta church is Clipper Temple AME Church. I'm at Cosmopolitan AME now simply because my sister, Pastor Deborah Grant, pastors there. But my home church in Atlanta is Clipper Temple AME Church, and I do recall the late Reverend Julius C. Williams. I was shocked one day when I left church, and I said to him, "Oh, I gotta go home and cook." And he said, "Oh, you can cook." He could not believe that I could cook.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I don't cook, especially now. I don't, but I can. And I did a good bit of it back then. So that's one answer to your question. I couldn't think of any others. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. We have a gymnast, we have a track star, also a mechanic, we have chefs on the line. And then you both have mentioned music. So what was was it voice? Did you play an instrument? What was it about music?
Who am I?
Wait,
Dr. Teresa.
You, Dr. Grant, and you, Dr. Fry Brown.
In 7th grade, I was the organist at my local church, which was right around the corner from my home. And at my father's church, I was a pianist. I played the piano for the choir. My minor at Bennett College was music. My major was French. My minor was music. And there I studied organ, great, gorgeous pipe organ at Bennett College Chapel back then, and had the opportunity to go do a field trip to Duke University to view their organ. They had a more massive pipe organ, and I also studied more of piano. So no voice, just organ and piano for me.
You said just organ and piano. That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
That's a big deal. Dr. Fry Brown?
So my mother was a musician. They didn't call it music when she was doing that, but she was a church musician. So I sang, direct choirs, and played the clarinet. That's about it.
Oh, I played the clarinet too. Look at there. I played the clarinet starting in the 6th grade all the way through college.
All right.
Oh, and the piano was with so let me ask.
And I played.
Yes, ma'am.
I played the French horn in the high school band.
Oh,
right.
wow.
Yeah.
So it's just a musical group here. So we've talked about some things that we don't know about you. We've talked about how you all have just charted the way. We've talked about the glass ceilings that you've had to break, the glass that you had to walk and crawl through. For those of us that are coming, this, as we are called, the new generation of leaders, there's a buzzword that's being thrown out now, and it's prophetic. Prophetic leaders and prophetic preachers and prophetic teachers. And I did have the pleasure of sitting in class with Dr. Fry Brown for prophetic preaching in the 21st century. And my question that I have for you all is a two-part question. The first being, what does being a prophetic preacher, teacher, being a prophet mean to you? And how does your work play into that? So what does it mean to be a prophetic teacher, preacher, or prophet? And how does your work play into that? And Dr. McCrary, we're going to start with you this time. We're going to let Dr. Fry Brown break.
Yes.
Prophet? Prophetic interesting because we had this morning a serious discussion at one of our faculty council meetings, and actually we were discussing that term that we see now, which has a lot of import, prophetic problem solving or problem solving, but you didn't ask that question. Interesting. So I won't move too much into that problem solving. Just say that terminology is problematic for particularly the position of pastoral care and pastoral counsel, because we don't want to posture ourselves as those who come in to solve the problem, the whole notion of rugged individualism. And on the part of prophetic, I'm really going to think a little bit more there if I think of prophetic pastoral care, because the point that I made was definition, and what I'll say is I'm working on my definition of prophetic, and I'll say a little bit more. Let me say something. I'm not even sure how it may tie in. This woman keeps coming to me. I spoke as well as I could about not having role models back when I was younger, and I thought, as I was thinking about this evening, I said, you know what? But there was this who called herself a prophet and a preacher, and I'll just call her Reverend B. But her behavior was challenging. She would walk down the street in the summertime wearing coats, sometimes fur coats. She would go to people's homes and challenge people who lived there. She literally built brick structure on some land that wasn't hers. So when I was coming into the ministry, I said many times, the only person I knew was Reverend B. And I was like, okay, that may be me, or just didn't know what to do with her. But in the last literally 48 hours, I have been really revisiting her. It was maybe last year when I finally, as I look back over my quote life and history and ministry, I asked my brother Butch, I said, what is Cousin B's family? I knew her name. I said, where did she come from? And Butch is like the griot in our family. He said, Carolyn, you remember? Was Mr. B's sister. Reverend B was the sister of Mr. B, who was the master brick mason in Macon. Actually, was the brick mason that did the brickwork of many of my father's general contractor for many of his houses and churches and classes. So to make this very short, in revisiting her now with what I have studied and learned, I wonder what trauma did she experience? And it has come to me that there were probably two great traumas. And the third one or first one may be that she was probably in some way accused or violated. One out of every three of us has some kind of violation, abuse, and or rape before we're 18. But that's kind of maybe a hypothesis. But the other two that are seemingly staring me in the face is that she was called to the ministry. But I can imagine if what I went through in 1973, what she must have gone through prior and been told what she could not do. And I'm clear that they said she laid those bricks, cement blocks even, so well that it took them great strength and effort to dismantle that structure. She probably could have been a master bricklayer, but here you have another profession where her family is renowned, but her gender say you can't be that. You can't be that. So I want to bring her discussion, and I'm pondering and meditating a lot. Prophetic, I'm not sure. I'll stop.
I thank you for your honesty, and that definition is still being worked. And I even thank you for bringing her into this space as I think about you talking about her laying a brick that was so strong and laying a foundation and laying a structure that was so sound that it took for someone and a great strength to come and to dismantle that. And that could be symbolic for a part of the prophetic of this tearing down of these strongholds, tearing down of these strong systems that have been built. And in some cases, it could even be building up a structure that is good enough for others to be able to stand on, that someone can't just come and blow over. So I thank you very much for bringing that into the space and allowing us to share in that moment and in her personhood. Dr. Grant, we now bring the question to you.
Well, not trying to be sermonic in any way, but one could say that prophetic teaching, being prophetic, means constantly living and anyhow existence. It may not be convenient for you to deal with these issues of gender, race, class, age, disability, sexuality, whatever the ism is. It may not be convenient, but you got to do it anyhow. Prophetic existence is, it may not be popular to step out, but you got to do it anyhow. Being prophetic means that, there may be folks who object to your talking about justice all the time, but you got to do it anyhow. Being prophetic means that, folks are not going to like what you're saying, how you're speaking all the time, but you got to do it anyhow. Being prophetic means that people may not like you, but you got to do it anyhow. Being prophetic means that you may suffer some consequences, but you got to do it anyhow. Being prophetic means that some folks may stop listening, but you got to do it anyhow. Being prophetic means that sometimes you might be alone, but you got to do it anyhow. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness as a mighty flowing stream. Being prophetic is an anyhow existence.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grant. She summed up prophetic in 3 words: do it anyhow. Dr. Fry Brown, the question now comes to you.
So I taught this class this afternoon on prophetic preaching. So I start out by talking about Zora Neale Hurston saying there are years that ask questions and those that answer. And I think that the prophetic is misunderstood as always talking against something instead of addressing the totality of risky behavior. It is having an attentive ear to God in the people. So it's never individual. And prophets die. So one doesn't do prophetic or call themselves prophetic just because they want power. Prophets die. They are left alone. They have to love the people, want everybody to be saved, for everybody to live. And this contemporary people say, I'm a prophet, or what? Or we even talk about who really hears from God, and who can say what I have is what God put in me. And it is very lonely. And if you look at biblical prophets as well as people today that call them, look at their lives. As Dr. Grant said, people don't like it. People don't understand what's happening. And I think in the era of people, when something happens, if you don't say this week, you shouldn't be there. You don't know what God has told them and how they're looking at things. And it's never one item that we talk about. Everything we say is interconnected. So if what I need to talk about happens to be sexism, and someone else has to talk about classism, and someone else has to talk about children, that does not mean that somebody's not prophetic, because all of those interact together. And I think that we rush too quickly to say I'm a prophet and don't count up the costs. So when Dr. Grant said you have to do it, there are some people that do it in different ways. So it's not always spoken word. Sometimes it's your life speaks more prophetically than what's coming out of your mouth. Because there are too many people that say, do this, do this, do this, and then go treat everybody else like they're nothing. So it's a holistic kind of endeavor that I think is only something when God urges you to do something and protects you while you're walking through fiery furnace, or you're walking through the wolves, when you walk through the people supposed to be your friends that are talking behind your back, but you know you can't help but continue to speak so that everybody could. I'm done. That's it.
Wow, is all I can say. I know that my fellow alum, my fellow colleagues, and all of those that have joined in and are watching are sitting in awe and amazement of the nuggets and the wisdom that you ladies have dropped today. And I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you very, very, very much for being the ones to do it anyhow, for being the ones to sacrifice the relationships, for being the one to not be afraid of not having people not like you, for being the ones to stand up, for being the ones to stand out, for being the ones to use your voice, for being the ones to show up holistically, for being the ones to embrace all that God has created you for being. We thank you for being the ones. We thank you for even coming and just spending this time with us and allowing us just to glean just a little bit from you, just to learn a little bit of how we too can walk this journey and how we too can survive the genderism and the sexism and the classism and the racism and all the isms that we face, whether it is in ministry or outside in the world. We thank you for being those prophetic leaders. We thank you for walking in your office of being a prophet. We thank you for being a teacher. We thank you for being a professor. We thank you for being a healer and a pastoral care provider. We thank you. We thank you. I thank you. I know during the time that I was in seminary, I share the same experience as Dr. Grant, that it was not a great experience, but I thank you, ladies, because each one of you played a role in getting me across that stage on May 11th of 2019, and I thank each of you for it. And so we will end because we are in our last 4 minutes. So I will give you all 1 minute. There was a couple of questions that came in, so I'm going to combine them. And I'm going to ask you all, often you hear the statement that says, if you could say something to your younger self, but I want to shift that question just a little bit. And what is one nugget that you would give to those that are following behind you, that they can take with them and carry as they are walking and unfolding and being molded and transformed into who God has created them to be? What is the one nugget that you would leave with the younger generation? And I don't mean age, but I mean the rising.
One.
Okay, maybe two.
I'm going back to Howard Thurman's The Sound of the Genuine. God knew who we were when God called us. And we don't have to be anybody else. And we just have to be faithful to the call that God, whether it is a pastor or mine was a preacher and write, be faithful to that. And keep focused on that. And don't try to be anybody. Be who you are. That's all I have.
Thank you. Dr. Grant?
There's a building on campus named after Dr. James Costin, one of the presidents of ITC, and it's called the Costin Life Learning Building. I think that's the name on there, Life Learning Building. I would say to the younger generation, and as you said, not necessarily chronologically, but younger in ministry. Life is an educational experience. So never stop studying. Never stop growing. Never stop reading. Because life is our realities. We are forever growing. So education is a lifelong reality. Never stop learning.
And Dr. McCrary?
Trust. The foundation for teamwork. The foundation for growth and development. Trust. Look for the trust of self, but also look for and nourish the trust in your relationships. Self, others, God, trust. Work on it. Cherish it. I would also say a little bit with Dr. Grant, never stop asking questions. Questions can save your life, literally. So ask your questions. find a way to get, remembering, however, answers to questions. There are responses. For me, there has been more life in raising questions, which lead to other questions. And then the awe in life is, oh, I never thought I would find that out by asking the question. Seek, and ye shall find, knocking the door. Ask, and something will be given. Trust your question and trust your feelings, because your feelings are sacred and your feelings give you entree sometimes to the words that formulate pursuant to what was really going on, because your feelings gave you an indication, and then you find the words to articulate those feelings to some extent. Trust your feelings. They're God-given, all of your feelings, and explore them sacredly.
Reverend Dr. Teresa Fry Brown, Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Grant-Collier, Reverend Dr. Carolyn Akua McCrary, we are eternally grateful for you all. This has been, and as I've already said, an amazing experience, and we thank you again for being the genuine you. We thank you for trusting. We thank you for never stop asking questions. We thank you for your continuous study, your continuous learning, your continuous growth and development, and then your being like the Sankofa bird and reaching back, not only just to pick up, but to drop those seeds for others as well. So we turn this program now over to our President Dean John F. Green, who will come and bring greetings in his own way.
To our alumni, President Dr. J. Hayco, and the officers of the Turner Theological Seminary Alumni Association, alumni, and friends, I am extremely overjoyed to join you on this occasion as we honor these three outstanding women for their leadership and contributions to the church and the academy. They all have been leaders of change and prophetic problem solvers, achieving justice and equality for women in church and society. We are thankful for their intellectual scholarship and mentorship in shaping the lives and ministries of so many throughout the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So, to these extraordinary women of African Methodism, Dr. Jacqueline Grant-Collier, the Reverend Dr. Carolyn Akua McCrary, and the Reverend Dr. Teresa Fry Brown, thank you for allowing us to sit at your feet tonight. We have been blessed and empowered by your stories, leadership, and ministries. To our alumni, thank you for your sharing tonight and your support throughout the year for Turner Theological Seminary. We appreciate all that you do and look forward to each of you joining us tomorrow as we celebrate our 127th Founders Observance. Good night, and in the words of the CBS anchor, Nora O'Donnell, stay positive and test negative. Greetings and Happy New Year. As the President Dean of Turner Theological Seminary, I want to take this moment to invite our alumni and entire AME Church connection to join us for a virtual celebration of the 127th Founders Observance of the Turner Theological Seminary, scheduled for February the 1st and 2nd. You will be blessed with impactful preaching and teaching by Bishop Samuel Lawrence Green Sr., presiding prelate, 7th Episcopal District.
This seminary is the intersection where race, religion, economics, politics, theology, history, language, culture, and the critical interrogation of what we think about God are brought together in a way that is both intersectional and utilitarian.
And Reginald T. Jackson, presiding prelate of the 6th Episcopal District.
The evangelical right also call themselves evangelical Christians. And my argument with them is I have no problem with you calling yourselves evangelical, but I have a problem with you calling yourselves Christian. Because my brother, my sisters, when you look at them, too many of them, they tell the king what the king wants to hear, not what the king needs to hear. The man,
and Dr. Dennis C. Dickerson, retired general officer, who will give our Henry McNeil Turner Heritage Lecture. I promise that you will be blessed and inspired by the preaching and teaching. So register today, and thank you in advance for your support of Turner Theological Seminary 127th Founders Observance.